Welcome back to Fast Gadgets. So let's get right into it. Today we're going to talk about Linux in the news for Sunday, May 14th. And a happy Mother's Day to all of you mothers out there. So we've got quite a bit to talk about today in the news for Linux. First off, Google found over 1,000 bugs in 47 open source projects. Zyka Zors reported on May 9th, 2017 in helpnetsecurity.com that there are a significant amount of bugs. Now, some of these bugs are not necessarily endangering to Linux or Linux-related projects, but they are problematic. Of those 1,000 or so bugs that were discovered, at least 264 do represent some serious security risks for the various projects dealing with Linux. Now, the cool thing is Google launched in December of 2016 OSS Fuzz, which is a tool and technologies that allow us to check the open source software and scan it for possible bugs or issues and then report those. And if you think about it, this is definitely a product that makes things, as far as open source projects, much more secure, and it definitely gives another way of viewing that source code instead of just using humans to view it, and makes the source code much more sanitized. And the comment here discusses that. OSS Fuzz combines various fuzzing engines, initially libfuzzer, with sanitizers, initially address sanitizer, and provides a massive distributed execution environment powered by clusterfuzz. So they're using tools here that I'm thinking use fuzzy logic that will scan probably source trees and look for bugs and issues. And the article goes on to say, so far OSS Fuzz has found a total of 264 potential security vulnerabilities, 7 in Wireshark alone, 33 in LibreOffice, 8 in SQLite 3, and 17 in FFmpeg. And those are some significant open source tools that are being used. So that is definitely something that is concerning, and it's good to know that this program OSS Fuzz is actually doing exactly what it's supposed to do. Next, Google's Fuchsia smartphone OS is going to dump Linux, and it has a very different UI. Now, most of us are either on an Android phone or an iPhone. There's really not a whole lot else out there available right now, but Google is touting a new product known as Fuchsia, and they're calling this a real-time OS. And they're very specific on what this OS might possibly be used for in the future. Quoting from the article here, Google's documentation describes Magenta as targeting modern phones and modern personal computers with fast processors, non-trivial amounts of RAM, with arbitrary peripherals doing open-ended computation. So it looks like Google is saying this is the next generation operating system, not just for phones, but also for personal computers as well, which is very interesting. In a previous video, I did talk quite a bit about Mac OS, and my personal opinion is that as good as Mac OS is, it is long in the tooth, and it's coming to the point where Apple seriously has to be looking at the next generation operating system. Many of the Mac users disagreed with me and felt that since Mac OS is so good right now, there's no need to make a change. And this harkens back for me to the venerable Palm Pilot, which had the most beautiful operating system and could do so many different things. But as the operating system aged, other better operating systems came about that could do much more than what the Palm OS was able to do. And unfortunately for Palm, they responded way too late with a revolutionary Web OS, which was the successor to Palm OS. But unfortunately, Web OS really did not hold a candle to Android, which already had a strong hold on the market, as well as the iPhone, which was coming out. When you have an operating system that is doing what we need, like Android, we can all see what the weaknesses are and where we need more advances. And one of the big things about, unfortunately, Android is that you really cannot get updates because there's no centralized structure. So hopefully this type of operating system would answer some of those issues and make it better for users, especially with regard to security. Even the Google Pixel, which is a technology that Google produces, still has issues with updates. So they do get updates to the Core OS, but they're still running the older Linux kernel 3.18, which came out at the end of 2014. So we're looking at almost a 3-year-old kernel that's being used. Now, before in Fuchsia, you could only see the command line if you were to compile the source code, but now things have changed and you're actually able to get an idea of what the OS is going to look like. Now, these are just placeholders, so there's no actual underlying code or programs that you can see. But you do get a pretty good idea of what things are going to look like. So this would be a full screen app. The previous screen here would be something that could be used in tablet mode. The main section of Fuchsia shows a profile picture, and tapping on some of these tools reveals power controls. You can long press on apps kind of like you can in Windows 10 or Windows 8 and 8.1, which I thought was a really neat way to be able to grab an application and drag it around. So I consider that really a Windows technology. So will Google Fuchsia take over for Android and be the next generation operating system? Possibly on the smartphone, but also on the desktop and laptop computers? It remains to be seen. Next in the news, Canonical founder Mark Shuttleworth did reveal that the recent changes that he's made to his company actually are indicative of their plan to do a initial public offering, or IPO, and taking the company public, which isn't much of a surprise. In early April, Shuttleworth announced Ubuntu Linux was ending its investment in Unity 8, the phone and convergent shell. Ubuntu had long been a cloud power, but it's been building its Internet of Things reputation, and soon thereafter, Jane Silber announced she was stepping down and Shuttleworth would return as CEO. These moves were all being made to start Canonical on its road to an IPO. Canonical has been doing well. Canonical was very successful with cloud growth, both public and private, but unfortunately Unity did not take hold as a common interface. And if you were to ask me, I think that we're looking at a company that is poised and very close to becoming an infrastructure company 100%. They may still release their operating system, but even that may have numbered days going forward. It's very difficult to say what the future is for Ubuntu Linux and whether or not development will continue. If there's any money to be made, then I would say yes, but once a company is going to go public and they look for venture capitalists and investors to come in and buy stock, they're going to have a very specific design and goal for the company in mind. And I think Mark Shuttleworth is bringing some of his vision with him to the company. And we can say that we would like Ubuntu Linux to continue and how important it is, but it really depends on what the role is that it's going to play in the company and how successful it is for the company. In other news, Ubuntu will arrive in the Windows Store, which is critically important for Windows 10 S users who cannot install software unless it is compiled and packaged to be a part of the Windows Store. Additionally, and this is very exciting, SUSE and Fedora will be coming to the Windows subsystem for Linux. And so we will now have 3 flavors of Linux that will be available to Windows 10 users. By bringing Ubuntu to the Windows Store, the company is now making it even easier for developers to install the tools and run Windows and Linux apps side by side. Working with other Linux firms shows that Microsoft's deal with Canonical was not a one-time affair, but rather part of a long-term investment in the Linux world. And it does make sense to me. Now, it is important to keep in mind that the kernels that are, well, it's not a kernel, it's the bash interface that's installed is somewhat limiting, so it's not a full implementation of the bash shell, but it does have the majority of what's needed cut. But it does have the majority of what's needed for developers if they choose to use Windows 10 as a development platform. Now, previously, many developers were using a Mac computer and Mac OS or OS X because it has a kernel built in and it's very easy to do development on that platform, even if it's for Linux applications. But in this case, Microsoft is poising themselves and saying you no longer would have to rely on Mac OS or Linux. You could actually run the shells right here in Windows and do your development right here inside the best platform in their mind for doing this type of development. Full MP3 support is coming to Fedora, and this is a pretty exciting development. In last November, the patents covering MP3 decoding expired, and Fedora Workstation enabled MP3 decoding via the MPEG-123 library and GStreamer. Now, before, if you had Fedora installed, unfortunately you would have to have had RPM Fusion non-free repository installed in order to allow you to install MP3 capable tools. Now, of course, here in the near future, you will not have to do that anymore, and we will be able to have MP3 built right into Fedora. There will be a bit of time while package reviews are carried out and tools that are safe to add are identified, as only MP3 is cleared and not other MPEG technologies yet. However, it will soon be possible to convert physical media or other formats to MP3 directly in Fedora without third-party repositories. For those of us that don't really like systemd, there is a systemd free distribution called Dev1 Linux, which has hit Release Candidate 2. Dev1 was created by self-described veteran Unix admins who find Debian's adoption of systemd abhorrent because they want complete control over the packages that load when Linux boots. Dev1 decided to fork not only the base distribution but also its governance. Because Debian has made it difficult to avoid systemd as init, entangling the system with unnecessary dependencies, the 1.0 release candidate emerged just recently, and the developers announced Dev1 Jessie 1.0 release candidate 2. Now this is interesting. GNOME, KDE, and Cinnamon were removed, but can still be installed, although they are known to suffer some glitches due to the lack of systemd. So that is a problem with developing a Linux distribution that is not based on systemd. Many of the core packages that we are used to having installed and groups like GNOME or KDE are something that are going to rely on systemd because it's the known init system basically that is built into most Linux distributions now. If you're interested, you can download the new distribution and have a look at it, and FastGadgets will definitely be looking at this distribution in the near future to see what it does offer and how flexible it is. If you enjoyed this episode of FastGadgets, please like and subscribe and consider sharing the video. I always do appreciate that, and of course I always enjoy hearing your comments and look forward to them as well. If you think about it and you'd like to buy me a cup of coffee, consider giving $1 on my Patreon page and becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/FastGadgets. I want to thank you for the support. I've really appreciated all of your comments, all your likes, shares, and those of you who have subscribed. Thank you again, and I'll see you next time on FastGadgets.